Our next unit is on trigonometry. Now, you study trigonometry in grade 10. However, we're just doing a quick review. There's going to be 3 lessons, one dealing with SOHCAHTOA, one dealing with sine law, and one dealing with cosine law. If after the lessons and after the work you're still unsure about something, either make sure you're asking me, or what you can do is you can access videos from those other grades from grade 10 through the school website. Okay, so SOHCAHTOA. These are what we call our primary trig ratios. And this year you'll also be doing secondary trig ratios, and we'll talk about that when we get there. Okay, so when we're talking about right angle triangles, that's the only time you can use SOHCAHTOA. So you have to have right triangles, and you can see I have 3 of them. And one of the most important things when you're dealing with them is to label the sides. And so you can see I have hypotenuse, opposite, and adjacent. Now the hypotenuse is pretty easy to do because it's directly across from the right angle. So you can see that this one's directly across. The next 2 have to deal with the theta that you were finding or the theta that they gave you. Okay, so the Greek letter theta standing for a variable for angle. So directly across from your angle that you are given or that you want to find is your opposite side. So in this case, it's this one. And what you're left with then is the adjacent to the angle. So it's really important to label that first, okay? Because if you get that wrong, it doesn't matter what else you do, everything else is wrong on your question. Okay, it takes approximately 3 seconds to do it. So hypotenuse, opposite, adjacent. Hypotenuse, opposite, adjacent. Okay, so you can just use the letters H, O, and A, and you're set to go. Okay, another important thing is to make sure that your calculator is set to degrees. Okay, every calculator is different, but for us, we're working in degrees, so it's important to have your calculator set in degrees. There are other measurements, there's radians, and there's also gradians on most calculators. Okay, in grade 12, you work in both degrees and in radians, so it's important to make sure that you're set to degrees, or all your calculations will be wrong. Okay, now you also know that when we're talking about sine, sine consists of a ratio. It's a ratio between the sides. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over the hypotenuse length. And finally, tan is opposite over the adjacent. Okay, and that's where we get SOHCAHTOA from. Okay, so it's actually SOHCAHTOA is just a way to remember 3 different little mini formulas because these are actually formulas. Okay, so SOHCAHTOA is just a way to remember what the formula is. All right, so finding sides. So we're going to do one with finding sides first. Okay, first of all, what you need to do is get it to show up. The first step is to label HOA. Okay, so in my question here, if I do that, hypotenuse, opposite, adjacent, no problem. Second step, determine if you are using SO, CA, or TOA. Now, some people, if you know they're unsure, one thing that you can do that works really, really well is you can actually literally do SO, CA, TOA, and underline the side that you want to find, which is in this case hypotenuse, and the side that I'm given is the adjacent. And you can see the one that's underlined in 2 places actually is the formula we're going to use. So we're going to use the cos, okay, and I'm just going to put the rest of the steps down. Then we fill in the formula and calculate. So my formula, we decided, is cos, so we're going to fill it in. So I highly recommend that you, for communication purposes, write down the little mini formula. So that formula is cos of a theta equals the adjacent side over the hypotenuse side. In this case, cos of 41. equals 12 over our x, and then we actually cross multiply and divide. And when we do that, we end up with x is going to equal 1 times 12 and then divided by the cos of 41. I make sure my calculator is set to degrees, and then I do my calculation. And I'm sure I have it somewhere. And what we end up with is approximately 15.9 due to, in most cases, one decimal place for both side length and angles. Now, and it's units because the 12, they don't tell me whether it, they do not tell me whether it's centimeters, meters, kilometers, so I'm just going to put units. All right, moving on. The next one, finding angles, and I have two different ones for that just so because angles have an extra step put in them. Okay, so if I look again at the steps, the first step obviously is to label HOA, determine if you're using SOHCAHTOA, fill in the formula and calculate, in this case, the ratio, and then we have to use the inverse to find the angle. So as I said, just one extra step for this kind. Okay, same kind of idea. What we need to do first of all is to label our triangle. So out comes our labels. Directly across from the right angle is the hypotenuse. Here's our theta, opposite, and this would be adjacent. Okay, you can see this time that I have O and H, so I know I'm going to use sine. If I don't know that, then what I can do is I can do the same technique that we did up above in the last example. So I know I have sine of a theta equals opposite over hypotenuse. So we're going to fill in what we know. This time we do not know theta. However, we do know our opposite and our hypotenuse. So we're filled in the formula. Now we want to calculate this ratio. So remember, with a ratio, we want to keep 4 decimal places for sure. And now we're at step number 4, use inverse to find our angle. So our theta in this case is going to be the sine inverse of our ratio. We usually put brackets around that. And when we do that, we end up with approximately 17.1 degree. Okay, moving on to the next example. Same process again. Label our triangle, hypotenuse, opposite, adjacent. So you can see this time we have opposite and adjacent, so we know where you're going to use the tan ratio. So tan of a theta equals its opposite side over its adjacent side, which equals, in this case, 12 over 24, sorry, 23, I wish it was 24. Take my calculator, calculate that. So 0.5217. And now to find angle theta, I take the tan inverse of that ratio. And when I do that, I end up with approximately 27.6 degrees. Okay, so that's SOHCAHTOA. A few questions for you to do in class. However, feel free to watch part B or even part B and C.